Imagine being born after the zombie apocalypse, not living through the chaos, not remembering the moment the world collapsed, but being born into a world where the collapse had already happened. You never saw the old world. You never experienced cities filled with people walking through crowded streets. You never saw schools full of students, parks full of children, or highways packed with cars rushing somewhere. You never watched television. You never played video games. You never scrolled through the internet late at night. All of those things belong to another time, a different world. The world you were born into is quiet, too quiet. The streets are empty, buildings stand abandoned, rust covers the cars that once filled the roads. And somewhere out there, something always moves. Slow footsteps dragging across pavement, the sound of the dead wandering through what used to be civilization. For most people alive today, the zombie outbreak was the moment everything ended. But for one girl, it was simply the beginning of her life. No one knows exactly how the outbreak started. Some survivors say it began with a virus. Others believe it was a failed experiment inside a laboratory. Some think it was a biological weapon that got out of control. The truth may never be known. What everyone agrees on is how quickly it spread. At first, there were only strange reports, people getting sick, violent attacks that made no sense, hospitals filling with patients showing terrifying symptoms, high fevers, confusion, uncontrollable aggression. Doctors thought it was a new disease, something serious but manageable. But then, the deaths began, and the dead did not stay dead. People who had died began moving again, not alive, not human, but moving. The infection spread through bites, through blood, through violence. One infected person could turn two more. Two could turn 10. 10 could turn hundreds. Within weeks, entire cities collapsed. News broadcasts showed panic everywhere. People ran through streets trying to escape. Hospitals were overwhelmed. Police departments could no longer keep order. Governments tried to quarantine cities. Military checkpoints were set up. But panic spread faster than any response. Families fled their homes with whatever supplies they could carry. Highways filled with endless lines of cars. But the infection followed them everywhere. Within months, the world changed forever. Power grids failed. Water systems stopped working. Food deliveries disappeared. Modern civilization slowly collapsed. The girl in this story was born 3 years after the outbreak began. By the time she opened her eyes for the first time, the old world was already gone. Most cities were empty. Governments had disappeared or retreated into fortified areas. Large communities were rare. Small groups of survivors lived scattered across the ruins. The girl's home was one of those communities. A survivor camp built inside an abandoned warehouse near the edge of a ruined city. From the outside, the building looked empty. Just another forgotten structure surrounded by weeds and broken pavement. But inside, people had turned it into a fortress. Large metal doors had been reinforced with steel plates. Windows were sealed with layers of wood and metal. Tall fences made from scrap surrounded the area. Watchtowers stood at every corner. Every night, guards climbed those towers and scanned the darkness beyond the walls, because zombies rarely gave warning before appearing. Inside the camp lived about 40 survivors. Each person had a different story about how they survived the collapse of the world. Some had been soldiers before the outbreak. They knew how to defend the camp. Some had been mechanics who repaired tools and equipment. One woman had been a doctor. She treated injuries and illnesses using whatever supplies they could find. Another survivor had once been a farmer. He taught the camp how to grow food again, because eventually, every survivor community learns the same terrifying truth. Food from the old world does not last forever. In the early years after the outbreak, survivors depended on canned food, supermarkets, storage facilities, warehouses. But year after year, those supplies disappeared. Now the camp relied mostly on what they could grow themselves. On the rooftop of the warehouse, survivors built a garden. Rows of vegetables grew in large wooden boxes: tomatoes, beans, potatoes, corn. They also kept a few chickens for eggs. It wasn't much, but it was enough to survive. The girl grew up watching all of this. To her, it was normal life. She never questioned why the world looked the way it did. She had never seen it any other way. Instead of classrooms and playgrounds, her childhood was filled with survival lessons. When she was 6 years old, she learned how to move quietly. Every step had to be careful. Loose gravel could make noise. Broken glass could shatter under pressure. Even breathing too loudly could attract danger, because zombies were drawn to sound. The louder the noise, the greater the risk. When she was 7, she learned how to recognize warning signs: birds suddenly flying away from trees, dogs barking somewhere in the distance, or the strange silence that sometimes happened before zombies appeared. Nature often sensed danger before humans did. When she was 8 years old, she learned how to climb. Many buildings outside the camp were unstable. Stairs collapsed, floors cracked, elevators no longer worked. Sometimes the safest path was up. The survivors taught her how to climb fire escapes and ladders, how to move across rooftops. Height could mean safety, because zombies rarely climbed well. But the most important lessons happened during scavenging trips. Every few weeks, small groups left the camp to search abandoned buildings for supplies. Old hardware stores sometimes still contained useful tools. Pharmacies occasionally had medicine that no one had found yet. And sometimes, survivors discovered hidden food supplies inside houses. These missions were extremely dangerous, but they were necessary. The girl watched these missions for years before she was finally allowed to join one. When she turned 10, the survivors decided she was ready. Early one morning, before sunrise, a small group prepared to leave the camp. The air was cold and quiet, perfect for moving unnoticed. 5 adults and the girl stepped out into the empty streets. The city around them looked like a ghost town. Cars sat abandoned in the middle of intersections. Storefronts had shattered windows. Weeds pushed through cracks in the pavement. Nature was slowly reclaiming everything humans had built. Eventually, they reached an old neighborhood. Rows of houses lined both sides of the street. Most looked untouched for years. The group entered one house through the back door. Inside, everything was covered in dust. Furniture still sat where it had been left. Family pictures hung on the walls. Children's drawings were taped to the refrigerator. The girl stared at the drawings. It was strange imagining kids who once lived there. Kids who had normal lives. Kids who never worried about zombies outside their door. The group searched the house carefully. Most cabinets were empty, but they found a few useful things: a flashlight, a toolbox, some batteries. After nearly an hour, the group prepared to leave. And that was when the girl heard something: a slow, scraping sound. She turned. From behind a rusted car, a figure stepped into the street. A zombie. Its movements were slow and unsteady. Its clothes were torn, its skin gray and decaying, its empty eyes locked onto her. The girl froze. Her heart started pounding. Every instinct told her to run, but she remembered the rule. Running makes noise, and noise brings more zombies. So she slowly stepped backward. The zombie followed, step after step, the distance between them shrinking. The sound of its dragging feet scraping against the pavement echoed in the silent street. Then suddenly, a sharp whistle echoed from behind her. One of the survivors had seen the danger. The zombie turned toward the sound. In that moment, the girl ran. She sprinted back to the group. They pulled her inside the house and quietly shut the door. Everyone stood still, listening. Outside, the zombie shuffled slowly down the street toward the whistle. Eventually, its footsteps faded away. Only then did anyone move. The girl's hands were shaking. It was the closest she had ever come to death. That night, back at the camp, survivors gathered around a small fire. One of the older survivors began telling stories about the world before the outbreak. Bright cities, busy highways, people everywhere. The girl listened quietly. It sounded impossible, like another planet. But as she looked out beyond the camp walls into the dark wilderness, she understood something. For the adults, the apocalypse had been the end of their world. But for her, it was simply the world she had always known. And tomorrow, she would step outside those walls again, because surviving was the only life she had ever known. And in this world, only the strongest lived long enough to see another sunrise.